Imagine waking up tomorrow to find that every powerful nation on Earth had collapsed. Not slowly, not one by one over centuries, but within a single human lifetime. Governments gone, cities reduced to ashes, trade vanished, writing itself forgotten. It sounds impossible, but it already happened once, and almost nobody remembers it.
Around 1200 BC, the most advanced civilization the world had ever known simply stopped. Not because of one great empire, not because of one unstoppable army, but because an entire world began to unravel. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. More than 3,000 years later, we still can't fully explain why it happened. But before we can understand how it ended, we need to understand what was lost. This wasn't a primitive world waiting to fail. By every measure available to us, it was a golden age. One so advanced that its people may have believed it would last forever. Picture the Eastern Mediterranean in 1250 BC. Massive palaces rise above the coastline, their walls covered in brilliant frescoes. Merchant ships, heavy with copper and tin, cross the open sea, carrying the metals that will become bronze, the foundation of armies, kingdoms, and empires. Kings write to one another as equals, exchanging gifts, arranging royal marriages, and settling disputes through diplomacy instead of war. This was a connected world. Egypt traded with the Hittites. The Hittites traded with Mycenaean Greece. Cyprus supplied copper to nearly everyone. Merchant ships crisscrossed the sea, carrying luxury goods, grain, and letters written in cuneiform on clay tablets that still survive today. It was, in every sense, an early version of a global economy. And, like every great civilization before and since, it probably felt permanent. Then, within the span of perhaps 50 to 80 years, it all came apart. The first sign wasn't dramatic. A city here, a trade route disrupted there, small disturbances, easy to dismiss. But then the fire started. Ugarit, a wealthy trading city on the Syrian coast, sent a desperate letter to a neighboring king, begging for ships and grain. The city was under attack. Help never arrived in time. Archaeologists later found the city's clay tablets baked hard, not by time, but by the fire that destroyed it. One letter was even found still sitting in the kiln, never sent. Hattusa, capital of the mighty Hittite Empire, a superpower that had once rivaled Egypt, was abandoned and burned. An empire that had stood for centuries vanished from history almost overnight. Mycenaean palaces across Greece, Pylos, Mycenae, Tiryns, went up in flames one after another. The elaborate writing system used by their scribes, known as Linear B, disappeared with them. It would take Greece over 400 years to write again. City after city, palace after palace. The destruction moved like a wave breaking across the map. And into this chaos stepped a group historians call the Sea Peoples. Egyptian inscriptions describe them arriving in a coalition, sweeping through the coastlines, overwhelming kingdoms that had stood for generations. Pharaoh Ramses III boasted of defeating them in a great battle near the Nile Delta, and the fact that he had to fight them at all tells you how close Egypt came to sharing the fate of its neighbors. But here's the strange part. We don't actually know who the Sea Peoples were. Egyptian records list names, the Peliset, the Shurden, the Denyen, and others, but where they came from remains genuinely disputed. Some historians think they were displaced populations from the Aegean and Anatolia, refugees fleeing collapse elsewhere. Others argue they were opportunistic raiders exploiting a world already falling apart. Some suspect they weren't one unified group at all, but many desperate peoples pushed into motion by the same crisis, converging on the wealthy coastlines of the eastern Mediterranean. Were they the cause of the collapse or a symptom of it? That question still divides scholars today, because the deeper you look, the more you realize the Sea Peoples were only one part of something much larger. Across the region, trade routes that had sustained kingdoms for centuries simply stopped functioning. Without tin shipped in from distant lands, bronze production faltered. Without bronze, weapons and tools became scarce. Without trade, the elite palace economies that depended on luxury goods and long-distance exchange had nothing left to redistribute to their people. At the same time, evidence from tree rings, pollen samples, and lake sediments points to a period of severe drought gripping the eastern Mediterranean. Crops failed. Grain shortages spread. Letters from the period describe kings begging each other for emergency shipments of food, a sign that famine wasn't a rumor, but a lived reality. Some archaeological sites show evidence of earthquakes striking the same regions during this window, weakening cities already strained by war and hunger. And in more than one location, evidence suggests the final blow wasn't foreign invaders at all, but uprisings from within. Ordinary people, worn down by decades of instability, turning against the palace elites who had failed to protect them. Climate stress, famine, earthquakes, broken trade networks, foreign incursions, internal revolt. For a long time, historians searched for the single cause, the one answer that would explain everything. But increasingly, scholars believe there wasn't one. Instead, picture a complex, interconnected system, kingdoms depending on each other for metal, food, and stability, where every piece supported every other piece. Now, imagine several disasters striking that system at once. Drought triggers famine. Famine sparks unrest. Unrest disrupts trade. Disrupted trade weakens armies. Weakened kingdoms become vulnerable to migration and invasion. And the resulting chaos creates the very conditions that push desperate populations to move, raid, and flee, becoming, perhaps, the Sea Peoples themselves. It wasn't one collapse. It was a chain reaction. And once it started, nothing could stop it. By 1150 BC, the world that had existed for centuries was gone. The Hittite Empire had vanished entirely. Mycenaean Greece descended into what historians grimly call a dark age, a period of roughly 400 years with no writing, smaller settlements, and a fraction of the population it once held. Egypt survived, but wounded and diminished, never again reaching the power it once commanded. International trade networks that had connected the Mediterranean for generations broke apart. The great palace economies disappeared, populations scattered. Entire cultures that had existed for centuries were never rebuilt. For the people living through it, this must have felt like the end of the world. Because in a very real sense, it was the end of their world. A world of grand palaces, international diplomacy, and interconnected trade that would not be seen again for centuries. But from the ashes, something new eventually emerged. Out of that darkness came the first stirrings of the Iron Age. New peoples, new alphabets, new city-states rose from the wreckage of the old order. The Phoenicians would spread a new writing system across the Mediterranean. Greece would slowly rebuild, eventually giving rise to the world of Homer, then democracy, then philosophy. Empires yet to come would learn, whether they realized it or not, from the failures of the ones that fell. The Bronze Age collapse remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries, not because we know nothing, but because we know just enough to understand how fragile even the mightiest civilizations can be. A network of kingdoms, prosperous and interconnected, brought down not by a single enemy, but by the compounding weight of crises no one saw coming all at once. And that is exactly why historians still study it today. Because every interconnected, prosperous civilization believes itself to be permanent until, quietly, it isn't.